Why Communism? Plain Talks on Vital Problems. Chapter 4, The State. Section 1, Economic Struggle. We have surveyed the economic system of capitalism. Now let's examine its political structure, the state. You've been taught that we live in a democracy, that the institutions of this country are bulwarks of freedom, that the government of the USA is a government by, for, and of the people. From time to time, you're allowed to cast your vote, and on this occasion, you are told that by universal suffrage, the sovereign will of the people is expressed. Yet, somehow or other, you as a worker and millions of others like you have a small chance with the state. Take such an issue as unemployment insurance. A law to guarantee every unemployed worker a certain subsistence minimum is a vital necessity for the workers. 4 years have passed since the beginning of the crisis. Numerous laws have been passed to protect the bankers, the real estate owners, the mortgage holders, the railroad magnates, but not a single law to alleviate the sufferings of the unemployed through direct state aid. Apparently, the state is not there to aid the workers. Or take another example. There are laws in courts and jails for criminals, and you were told that citizens are all equal before the law. But you know perfectly well that a big swindler, a banker, who robbed a great many poor people of their savings, a racketeer who is extorting hundreds of thousands from innocent people, seldom lands in jail. And if he does, he's soon pardoned or else has imprisonment turned into something like a vacation in a country club. But if you, a worker, steal a loaf of bread to satisfy your hunger, the law will be after you and there will be no mercy. A rich man's state. The truth of the matter is that this is a rich man's state and a rich man's government. The state is there to act on behalf of the finance capital and to protect the interests against the people. The government is the executive committee of the big trusts. You, an American worker, may be shocked to hear such a statement. You've been fed so much democracy bunk that it's almost sacrilege to reveal the true nature of the state. This is exactly what your masters are after with their propaganda. They want you to believe that the state is holy and that its high functionaries are like saints surrounded by halos. All the pulpits, schools, newspapers, radios, lectures, moving pictures, and other sources of information controlled by bignesses are engaged in giving you a false notion about the state. Yet consider for a moment the simple fact that 1% of the population controls nearly 2/3 of the nation's wealth. And it will not be difficult to realize that the individual composing this 1% must have vastly more powerful than individuals composing the 87% of the population who own, together, only 10% of the national wealth. Compare your own influence with the influence of a big banker in your community in dealing with the precinct policeman, the police captain, the judge, the prison warden, the governor, the legislature. Why? A plain worker doesn't count at all when it comes to what they call the seats of power. The state is an instrument of power in the hands of big industrialists, bankers, and landlords, who by this token are the ruling class. The state is there to the effect of the exploitation and oppression of workers and of poor families and small farmers, and also subjugated colonial people by the ruling class. The Constitution, the government, its laws, its agencies, the army, the militia, the police, the courts, the jails, the legislatures, all are there to effect the exploitation and oppression of you and millions like you. We know you, an American worker, may hate to call yourself exploited and oppressed. You have been taught a false pride, not the pride of refusing to be exploited, but the pride of refusing to admit that you are being exploited. Your refusal, however, does not change the fact that the coal barons squeeze the last drop of your lifeblood for the sake of their profits. And when you go on strike, the state sends its deputy sheriffs and militia to crush your resistance. Here, in labor disputes, you can easily recognize the state as the executive committee and the strong arm of the entrenched wealth. We communists do not like the expression labor dispute. It suggests a disagreement among people on an equal basis. It suggests a friendly bickering of parties to an agreement who happen to disagree on a certain point. It suggests an amicable and perfectly lovely settlement of mutual grievances. What a false and misleading notion! There are no labor disputes. This is the wish of capitalists to press some more sweat and blood out of the workers, and there is the wish of the workers to fight their enemy, who feeds on them. There is war. It is a class war. It is waged by the representatives of one class, the oppressors, against the mass of another class, the oppressed. In this war, the state is always invariably on the side of the oppressors. Some of its representatives may try to achieve the ends of capital by cajoling and wheeling, but they always keep the big stick ready. The state, the big stick of the owners of wealth, the big stick of the corporations. This is the only realistic view of the state. Everyone who tries to persuade you that the state is your friend, your defender, the state is impartial and only regulatory is misleading. We hear Roosevelt say that the state is there to protect both industry and labor. But under capitalism, you cannot protect both industry, meaning the capitalists, and labor, meaning the workers. When you protect industry, you give freedom to exploit labor. When you protect labor, you make it possible for labor to get more out of industry. You cannot keep fire and water reconciled. In reality, the state under Roosevelt is a much more efficient instrument at the service of big capital than it was under Hoover. In the name of creating jobs, it has instituted inflation, which has cut the value of the dollar. Under the pretext of raising wages, it has raised the consumer goods to such an extent that the actual earnings of the workers in terms of goods have been slashed. Under the pretext of aiding farmers, it has made secure the mortgages for the mortgage holders, while making farmers foot the bill under administration control. Under the pretext of saving credit structure of the country, it has allowed the big banks to swallow a number of small banks, and the latter to swallow savings of numerous workers and farmers. Under the pretext of security for commerce, it has launched a tremendous program of naval construction. Under the pretext of regulating industry, it has made it possible for big corporations to gain additional power at the expense of small businessmen and particularly the worker. The state under Roosevelt is working overtime. All these administrators, adjusters, and consolidators are nothing but agents of the state serving the interests of big business. The states are locally and especially instruments of the capitalists. The militia is rampant everywhere. Sheriffs are breaking up strikes. Policemen are carrying out evictions. Militant workers are being imprisoned for strike activity. Unemployed workers and their leaders are being clubbed and jailed for demanding relief. Negroes are lynched under the benevolent guardianship of the state. The state is active indeed, and if you, a worker, fail to realize that these bluecoats and district attorneys, judges and prison wardens, governors and presidents, generals and admirals together with the gentlemen in legislatures, state and federal, are nothing but corpse of the agent of big capital, you are merely reacting the way these gentry wish you to. The communists are the only group in present-day society who recognize the basic nature of capitalist state. The state may change its appearance and its appendices. It may use a parliamentary system with limited freedom of speech to opponents, as long as this opposition is not too dangerous. It tightens the screws and tries to silence opposition when the situation becomes disturbing for big capital, as this was done under Wilson during the war. It may do away with parliamentary procedure altogether and institute an open reign of terror when the danger to capitalism becomes particularly acute due to the rising tide of the revolutionary labor movement, as was done in fascist Germany. The forms change. The phraseology differs according to the time and place. The essence remains. The essence of the capitalist state is the service of the employ of capitalism for the preservation of capitalism. The other political parties. One question of the state, the communists naturally and unavoidably come into clash with other political parties. The question is put squarely. Can the workers achieve their liberation by merely taking over the state machinery of capitalism? To this question, liberals answers in the affirmative. The labor rights answer in the affirmative. The socialists answer in the affirmative. The communists answer in the negative. The liberals are dissatisfied with the functions of the state. They point out its shortcomings. They do not close their eyes to the fact that there is inequality. They know the war-breeding nature of the capitalist state. But what did they propose to do? They proposed little tinkering here and there. Direct primaries were one of the acts of such tinkering. The abolition of lame duck sessions is another. The initiative of referendum is a third, but that has nothing to do with the very nature of the state and the bulwark of private property and capitalist exploitation. An improvement in electoral laws, an extension of freedom of the press, no matter how important for the working class, does not touch upon the fundamentals of the capitalist state, namely, its being an instrument of power in the hands of big owners of wealth. Improve the state, and you have made it more flexible, more capable of adapting to its circumstances. You have made it a better instrument of oppression. The American labor leaders of the William Green, Matthew Wool, and John Lewis type do not wish to have a revolutionary political party organized to defend the interests of the working class. They are not opposed to the capitalist system even in words. They propose to support such representatives of Republican and Democratic parties as are willing to introduce reforms on behalf of labor. Not much breath need to be wasted on the program of labor leaders punishing the enemies and rewarding friends. The Republican and Democrat parties are parties of big capital. They may fight one another in the elections for the control of the administration, but they differ little from each other when they do the bidding of the big trusts. Their treasuries are filled from the coffers of big industrialists and bankers. Quite often, their chief leaders are themselves big industrialists or bankers, or both. Andrew Mellon, Charles Dawes, Dwight Morrow in the Republican Party, Owen D. Young, John Raska, Bernard Baruch in the Democratic Party. To explain the gentlemen of these parties will help the workers achieve their goal is to expect that the leopard will change its spots. The Socialists, on the other hand, have their own political party, and they claim to be opposed to the capitalist system. They sometimes wax eloquent, denouncing the evils of the capitalist system, but what do they propose? They propose to improve the capitalist state so as to make it an instrument for doing away with private ownership of wealth. In other words, they preach the nonsense of turning the exploiters' club by the power of prayer into a rosebush. Since this theory appears in the garb of socialism, and since there are a number of workers who lend their ear, it is necessary to dwell on this a little longer. No need of revolution? The socialists say that there is no need of a revolution. They say democracy has prepared for the workers the means necessary to achieve socialism. Let the workers use universal suffrage, they say, to send socialists into legislative assemblies. Let socialists form a majority in these assemblies. When this is done, the road open to pass laws abolishing the capitalist system. Of course, there is federal constitution which prohibits the confiscation of property by legal procedure, but this, says the leader of the American Socialists, Mr. Norman Thomas, can be overcome. Let us have a constitutional convention to amend the Constitution so as to permit Congress to enact socialist legislation. Let Congress then enact a law which orders the big corporations to cede their industrial establishments and all their property to the state. Let us not expropriate them, say the socialists, not by any means. Let us pay them with the bonds issued by the government and redeemable in 30 years. This will mean introducing socialism by pacific methods. No revolutions, no seizures of power, no infringement upon the law, no mass action, no expropriation of the exploiters. Everything lawful, everything in a gentlemanly fashion. This is how electoral law works. The citizens vote, the legislators assemble, they count noses and find the socialist majority. The socialist majority, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, passes a law. Capitalism passes out. The big trusts bow before the will of the people. Gentlemen, you are the lawful heirs of our system, they say politely. Leave the stage for the Norman Thomases and their associates. What a sweet picture, and how deceptive. We are sorry to mar such an idyllic scene. But we communists are realists, and we do not wish to be carried away by such fantasies, especially when these fantasies are beneficial to the capitalist system, as they tend to keep workers from fighting the capitalist state. Let us not argue at length about the ingenious invention of paying owners of industrial establishments with bonds, which means recognizing that the exploiters are entitled to their monopoly and the means of production, and that, if they are going to give them up, it ought to only be through sale. It is not really difficult to see that if you pay your exploiters with bonds, you continue their exploitation in another form. You may have taken over their factories, but you still continue working for the profits of the former owners. Everybody can see that. Let us rather examine the proposal of introducing socialists by the means of the ballot. What does the state consist of? It consists not only of legislative assemblies, which, by the way, play a lesser and lesser role as big monopoly capitalism grows. It consists, first of all, of the army with its commanding staff, the militia, the police force, and the executive branch of government which uses the armed forces to achieve the ends of capital. Is it possible to get a majority socialist congressman? Even assuming that such a miracle would happen, it still wouldn't spell socialism. Even before there's any danger of the majority of socialists actually ready to legislate socialism, the electoral laws can be changed to prevent such an emergency. Even were a socialist majority to convene, their decisions might not be carried out. One squad of soldiers is sufficient to disperse an entire legislative assembly, the way it was done in Italy, in Germany, and in many other countries. In the case of a socialist majority, we have before us one of two possibilities. Either the capitalists are certain that the socialist leaders are harmless to capitalism, as was the case in numerous occasions in Germany and England when the power was in the hands of socialist leaders. In such case, they will rather be glad to have them carry the burden of government for capitalism. Or the capitalists do not like the socialist majority for one reason or another, and then they will have every means to get rid of the unwelcome legislatures. Remember that the socialists are against revolutionary methods. Remember that they are against using force. Remember that they do not appeal to the masses to offer resistance against brutal capitalist oppression. And they do not forget that capitalism is armed to the teeth and will use its armed forces to secure its domination. Capitalism never gives up its wealth and power voluntarily and has little respect for its own laws when it comes to defend its rule. He who says that you can use the capitalist state to abolish capitalism verily resembles one who says you can demolish an enemy's fortress by the sounds of trumpets. It would seem at the first glance that the socialists are merely engaging in daydreaming. Unfortunately, it isn't as harmless as that. The activities of socialist leaders are what actually harmful to the interests of the workers. What is the real role of socialist leaders? We have no quarrel with those rank and file who workers are at heart revolutionists and socialists, but do not see through the fog of socialist phrases. But we are obliged to point out the pernicious role of socialist leaders. At a time when it is necessary for the workers to understand the real nature of the state as an instrument of exploitation and oppression, they tell the workers that the state, as constituted as present, can be a means of liberating them from exploitation and oppression. At a time when it is necessary for the workers to gather strength and fight against the capitalist state and its laws, the socialists preach to the workers a reliance on this very state and its laws. At a time when it's necessary for the workers to develop the will to power which shall ultimately crush the capitalist state and make the workers and farmers and the ruling power of the state their own making. The socialists tell us, the workers, that nothing of this kind is needed, and that they have to remain within the legal limits prescribed for them by the ruling class. Do not be surprised if you hear communists uttering harsh words against socialist leaders. Here we have anti-working class activities carrying out in the name of socialism. Destructive tactics parade here as a means to liberate the workers, a class-conscious worker who finds no words harsh enough to characterize such a line of action. Vital problems involved. Our dispute with socialists is not a dispute in words. It is a clash in politics. Perhaps we need not go as far as the summer of 1917 in Russia, when the socialists, holding power, refused to ally themselves with the workers and peasants organized in the Soviets against the exploiters of their state, but rather entrenched themselves in the capitalist state together with the exploiters against the workers and peasants, until they were dislodged by the November 1917 revolution. Under Bolshevik leadership, which crushed the capitalist state and established the Soviet state as an organ of power of the workers and poor peasants. Perhaps we need not go back to 1918 and 1919 in Germany, right after November 1918 revolution, when the socialists, taking power in the capitalist state, actually crushed the uprisings of the workers, flooded the country with workers' blood, and thus secured Germany for capitalism. We have facts of the more recent past which are no less illuminating. For 14 years, the socialists held power in Germany. There is cruel logic to the situation of a socialist leader becoming a defender of the capitalist state. Once you defend the state, there is no reason why you should not become a member of the cabinet of the government of that state. The socialists become ministers, chiefs of police, judges, prison wardens, executioners. This was the case not only in Germany, but also in Great Britain, in Austria, in Belgium, and elsewhere. Once you are part of the machinery of the capitalist state, you of necessity do the bidding of the owners of wealth. Such is the nature of that state. The socialists everywhere fought against the revolutionary labor movement, which was trying to secure higher wages, shorter hours, and better working conditions. They suppressed workers' demonstration by force of arms. Remember Wedding and Neukölln, sections of Berlin, where a socialist chief of police using socialist policemen fired machine guns point blank at workers celebrating May 1st by street demonstration, and where scores of workers were killed. Remember a socialist air minister and the socialist MacDonald cabinet of Great Britain sending military airplanes to drop bombs on Arabian villages and territories which oppressed nations arose against foreign rule. Remember a socialist war minister in the same cabinet sending troops to India to crush the struggles of workers and peasants for Indian freedom and thus to secure India for the British capitalist exploiters. Remember the activities of German socialist leaders in cutting the wages of the workers, in cutting the unemployment insurance of the workers, in voting appropriations for the construction of battleships and allowing fascists full freedom of propaganda, organization, and action. When the fascist danger became acute, the socialist leaders, instead of agreeing to an united action of all the workers, whether socialist or communist, against fascism, made common cause with von Hindenburg, appealing to the workers to vote for him as the savior of democracy. The German socialist leaders did not defend the interests of the workers, but they defended the interests of the capitalist state in its democratic form. They allowed the Nazis to grow strong and to seize the power of the state. There is blood in the hands of socialist leaders, blood of the workers. Do not call us vindictive when we say socialist leaders are traitors to the working class. We're merely calling a spade a spade. We are realists. We have discussed war danger. What stands socialists towards war danger? In 1912, the Socialist Party's world met in Basel, Switzerland, an extraordinary Congress of Socialist International, and passed resolutions pledging everybody to fight for socialism in case of war. But when the imperialist war came in 1914, each Socialist Party leadership joined hands with the capitalist government in delivering masses to fight the war for the profits of capitalists, for the colonies, for markets, and for plunder. Since then, the Party of the Socialist International have been instrumental in preparing the war and carrying out war policies of their capitalist overlords. An extraordinary international socialist conference met in Paris at the end of August 1933. The socialist leaders discussed the question of fascism, the question of war and peace. Did they suggest any effective remedy against fascism? There's only one such remedy, a revolution of the working class to overthrow capitalism by first destroying the capitalist state. The socialist leaders again talked democracy instead of revolution. They talked League of Nations and disarmament conferences instead of real mass struggle against war, a struggle which must culminate in transforming the imperialist war into a war against the home exploiters and oppressors. What is the actual achievement of the Socialist Conference? It spread illusions among the workers to the effect that by using the instrumentality of the capitalist state, they can abolish the evils of capitalist oppression. By using the instrumentality of capitalist international institutions like the League of Nations or the Hague Tribunal, they can abolish wars. What holds true of socialists generally holds true of various groupings of socialism. Socialists are divided into conservative and radical groups. In the USA, the Moissaites. What unites them is their fight against the revolutionary movement of the workers and their support of the belief that the capitalist state. We in America have not seen socialists in the role of cabinet members or senators, but we have seen socialist congressmen, socialist mayor in Milwaukee and Reading, socialist judges, and socialist police chiefs. Were there in any way fighting for the capitalist state? Pardon. Were they in any way fighting the capitalist state? Not at all. A socialist congressman during the imperialist war gave his consent to all the military appropriations. Another socialist congressman later gave his consent to the predatory Versailles Treaty, the venomous child of war. The socialist city administrators were as adamant in refusing to introduce unemployment insurance as they were the Republican and Democratic city administrators. Workers demanding home relief and unemployment insurance were just as brutally beaten up in Milwaukee and Reading under a socialist mayor as they were their brothers in Pittsburgh and New York under Republican and Democratic mayors. A socialist mayor in Milwaukee was no less prompt in cutting the wages of city employees than was his Democratic master in the White House in cutting the wages of the federal employees. And just as the socialists of every other country condone and support wage-slashing actions of the capitalists, so the socialists of the United States support the National Recovery Act, which is a concerted act on the living standards of the masses. The socialists of the United States are not in the cabinet, but they have arrived. They are treated by the capitalist masters with respect. They are good, they are peaceful, they are loyal. They are held up as shining example in opposition to the dissatisfied militant communists. The labor baiter, Mr. Grover Whalen, one-time chief of police of New York and now NRA administrator for the city, appeals to the Republican, Democratic, and socialist politicians alike to help him in the Blue Eagle drive. Time is not far distant when the socialists will be called to government positions to stem the tide of rising workers' revolts by the means of sweet phrases about achieving socialism by the power of the ballot. The capitalist state is a glaring fact. It is flesh and blood of the capitalist system. It stands in the way of workers' progress towards a new free life. Can it be abolished by gradual transformation? Those who say it can are the staunchest supporters of the capitalist robbers and the most active promoters of the imperialist wars. Their theory is not harmless indeed. It is a poisonous theory. It is a smokescreen behind which cruel capitalist exploitation is hiding. We communists say that there is one way to abolish the capitalist state, and that is to smash it by force. To make communism possible, the workers must take hold of the state machinery of capitalism and destroy it.